Good evening, everyone, and good afternoon to those in the US. My name is William Sorg. I'm an MBA student at Stanford and a co-president of the Brazil at Silicon Valley movement. It's an honor to welcome you to the final event of our digital conference. Today, we'll cover some topics that are top of mind for Brazilian leaders. Over the past few years, much has changed in our payments landscape. New regulations, new entrants, new solutions, which has kept financial institutions, retailers, investors, and customers on their toes. More recently, we've witnessed the rising popularity of Superapps, proposing solutions that blur traditional lines between industries. And we're honored to welcome two thought leaders to discuss these topics and other transformational changes in Brazil and in the world. But before we begin, I want to recognize the support of our sponsors who make the Brazil at Silicon Valley movement possible. Bank of America, BTG Pactual, DASA, Fundação Lehman, Global Ventures, Google for Startups, IBM, Instituto DOR, Magalu, Pinheiro Neto Advogados, SoftBank, Stone, and Valor Capital Group, with whom we've partnered closely to organize this panel. And to kick off today's discussion, I'm honored to introduce Dan Schulman. Dan is the CEO of PayPal. He's frequently been recognized by Fortune as one of the top 20 business persons of the year, and has also been named one of Glassdoor's top 50 CEOs. Previously, Dan served as group president for American Express, founding CEO of Virgin Mobile US, leading the company for 8 years before its acquisition by Sprint. Earlier in his career, Dan was president and CEO of Priceline Group, where he led the company through a period of rapid growth and expansion. He also spent 18 years at AT&T, where he held multiple leadership positions. Dan is actively involved in the World Economic Forum and serves on the board of directors of Verizon. He earned a BA from Middlebury College and an MBA from the NYU Stern School of Business. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And now we welcome our moderator. Originally, we were scheduled to host Scott Sobel, but unfortunately, he tested positive for COVID and is currently recovering at home, and we wish him a fast recovery. And we're glad to have Ambassador Cliff Sobel stepping in. He's a founding partner of Valor Capital Group, a growth equity and venture capital firm focused on U.S. and Brazil cross-border opportunities. Previously, Cliff served as the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands and ambassador to Brazil under both the Bush and Obama administrations. He currently serves on the advisory board for Southcom and until recently served on the Secretary of State's Foreign Advisory Board and the President's Intelligence Advisory Board. Previously, he served on the Military Advisory Board for EUCOM and NATO and was a board member of Diamond Offshore Drilling, Aegon, and Alpinvest. He was also chairman of Net2Phone, a company that went public and was acquired by AT&T. Cliff, it's a pleasure to have you here.
I think the pleasure is ours, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Cliff. Towards the end of the panel, we'll also have a Q&A session, so feel free to send your questions through YouTube. And now I'll send it over to Cliff to kick off the discussion.
Thank you, and let me start by thanking BSV for setting up yet another great conference. We at Valor are very proud to be sponsors. I'd like to specifically thank Dan for joining us today. Unfortunately, as you've heard, Scott is not able to participate as he is recovering from COVID, but he did want me to share a few thoughts with all of you, as well as Dan. And he said in his email to me this morning, BSV is one of the most important events for the Brazilian and global tech ecosystem. And Dan, by your participation, it further acknowledges this point. Valor has been investing in and helping to build the Brazil ecosystem over the last decade, and we're proud to see its dramatic growth. I, Scott, have known Dan for over 25 years and have worked with him in different capacities across our careers, and I'm proud to be able to call him not only a friend, but a mentor. I wish I could have been in a condition to have been part of this talk with Dan, but we're all in good hands with the ambassador. Valor and BSV appreciate, Dan, yours and PayPal's support for the conference, underscoring Brazil's Latam tech ecosystem. Have fun. So with that, before we get into PayPal, which I think we're all looking to hear about, I'd like to ask Dan to talk about another subject, and that's part of his personal life. He is very dedicated and very passionate about martial arts. And in a former conversation, he talks about how it's shaped his life. So perhaps, Dan, if you would allow me, maybe you can talk about martial arts and how it's worked with your not only corporate life, but personal life.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry we couldn't do this in person. Hopefully, one decade we will be able to. We'll see how quickly all of this can move into the rearview mirror. Second, Cliff, I just want to say in front of everybody, we've known each other for as long as I can remember, all the way back to net to phone days, and your friendship and over these years has been constant, consistent, and I have a ton of affection for you and Scott, and I hope Scott gets better as quickly as possible. So martial arts, I do a form of martial arts called Krav Maga. It's the Israeli martial arts. It combines 5 different martial arts into one particular methodology. But what I find mostly about martial arts and what I love about it, and I've been doing it for almost 40 years, which is unbelievable when you think about it, is the physical part becomes sort of second nature. It's really the philosophical part. It's really the way you think about things that become primary going forward. And I would say the things that you most learn from martial arts is a sense of humility, because no matter how much you know, no matter how proficient you might be, when you go into a ring, you're always going to get hit by your opponent. Your opponent, regardless of their rank, has a chance of beating you. You always can learn something, and it is never predictable in terms of how a fight will go. And eventually you learn that the object is not to win a physical fight. The object is not to get into a fight. And that usually the biggest impediment to being able to walk away from a fight is ego. It's, you don't want to lose face or something like that. And I think this ability to think very coolly and calmly under extreme pressure, to know that you don't know it all and you will never know it all, to know that you should always be learning, always be respectful of everybody. These are things that just carry with me in my life and in the way that I conduct business. And I wish everybody in the world did serious martial arts. I think perversely, or like as people may not think, counterintuitively, it'd make for a much more peaceful world.
Well, I'd just like to respond to one comment you made. I think when you stop learning, you stop growing. And I can think of no better person that leads by example than you. So with that, let's get into PayPal. As a result of the global pandemic, we've seen a hyper acceleration of digital transformation across industries such as retail and e-commerce. In the United States alone, 10 years of projected growth has happened in 12 months. E-commerce has grown 28% in 2020, which has driven the mobile and digital payments space to reach 67% of online shoppers. Digital payments has become one of the largest categories recently to receive venture funding in the second quarter alone of this year, reaching $8 billion. PayPal is at the forefront of the market, having generated over $6 billion in revenues in Q2, adding 11 million new customers to reach 443 total active accounts. We can go in many different directions, Dan, but I think it'd be nice to start by getting your views of the trends you see happening in the mobile and digital space.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, we reported 403 million active accounts on the platform. I don't want this to be like sort of one of these announcements that we have 443 million. So I just want everyone not to go crazy on that announcement there. But all the other things you said, Cliff, were true. So I appreciate that. So look, I feel like the pandemic unleashed a number of trends that were happening, but they fast forward them, as you mentioned, anywhere between, 3 years in the most conservative estimates to, in some places, maybe up to 10 years. We are all moving into a much more digital life than we've ever lived before. The way we work, the way we play, the way we get educated, the way we get our healthcare has all gone digital. The way we pay for things, the way we shop, the fundamental nature of retail has changed completely. It used to always be physical storefronts were by far and away the number one thing that retailers paid mind to. And e-commerce was usually a separate division and a secondary citizen. Now, clearly, retailers are thinking about digital across all channels, that the separation between online and offline is dissipating, that somebody can order online, pick up in store, they can go in store, scan things, pay for it digitally. Retailers are increasingly using digital forms of payments like QR codes to actually integrate their loyalty programs straight into this so that they can maintain contact with their customers. Retailers are also thinking about contextual commerce, going where their customers are, because consumers are increasingly wanting not to go to multiple websites, but to put in a wish list and then have retailers come to them to satisfy their needs and have a kind of almost universal checkout on that. So everything really is changing. And in addition to that, the finance system is changing. The finance system we have today, and I'm sure we'll talk about this when we get into things on crypto, because I know that's on your mind. But the finance system of today is antiquated. It's inefficient. It's expensive. And I think we're going to see more change in the financial system in the next 5 years than we've seen in the past 25.
Everything is being compressed and happening so quickly. And if you don't continue to innovate, you get left behind for sure. We'll get to crypto in a minute, but let's first talk about Brazil and Latam. PayPal has a large presence in the market with 6 million users in Brazil and 15 million in Latam. I hope those facts are accurate. And over 23% of Brazilians are purchasing abroad using PayPal. One market stat that is impressive is 70% of Brazilians already have an account in a fintech app, which shows significant opportunities for companies like PayPal for the future. Last year, PayPal started offering work capital loans to sellers in Brazil, and I'm sure we'll soon see many other new products. Dan, maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance of Brazil and Latam for PayPal, and what other new apps we might be seeing in the region in the not too distant future.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Brazil is one of the most important economies in the world. It clearly is one of the largest. I think it's got tremendous potential and in terms of digitization. And you are seeing that by the incredible growth in fintechs in Brazil. I mean, there's like just one example after another of neobanks or kind of, I would call it next gen merchant acquirers in Brazil that are taking tremendous share, that are growing exponentially, offering incredibly innovative services. And it's really impressive to see the amount of innovation happening across Latam and in Brazil in particular, although Mexico is a tremendous amount of momentum there as well. So, it's not surprising to see that. You've had a kind of a entrenched banking system that's now being opened up. You have a very progressive and I think future thinking president of the central bank in Roberto Campos. I think he is one of the most progressive thinkers of all the central banks that I think about. You look at the success of PIX. It's unbelievable.
No, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, and I'd like you to talk about maybe some of your conversations with Roberto. But he also won the Central Banker of the Year award last year, which is remarkable, and it underscores his dramatic leadership.
Yeah, I mean, not surprising. I mean, he is very thoughtful, very inclusive in terms of just getting input from the industry, thinking about things in a very holistic manner, learning from other countries. A lot of attention spent to what happened in India. So I just think the environment is ripe for change. I know even the incumbent players there are rapidly digitizing, looking at partnerships. You have incredibly successful companies in Latam like Mercado Libre, which is a partner of ours. I think you'll see us doing more and more partnerships through Latam and putting more and more investment into it. So it's a dynamic market.
We'll come back to Brazil in a minute, but I think many people are intrigued with the recent comment in your earning reports that you are now completed the code for your new super app. And there's been some comments that will include 25 new features, some of which I found to be very interesting: conversational commerce, crypto checkout, loyalty and benefits, which you mentioned briefly earlier. It would be great to hear your thoughts on the super app strategy, when you might be releasing it. And I'm curious, as you release it, do you look at individualizing it for regions? And if so, what are the differences as you look at different regions in the world?
Yeah. Well, the super app, is not a PayPal originated idea. I mean, I think WeChat Pay and Alipay in China are really good examples of current super apps. A lot of what I learned about super apps came from Martin Lau, who's the president of Tencent and a good friend of mine. But I don't think, to your point, that you can take exactly what happened in China or another country and extrapolate it across the world. I think you do need to customize by country, but there can be, the way that I think about it is you can have sort of 80% kind of a similar framework and then customize the local last 20%. or so of the super app, depending on regulatory environments as well as consumer behavior and merchant desire. But the super app really is acknowledging the fact that payments, basic financial services, and shopping are all kind of what were separate pillars, are now coming together in a connected economy. And really, you need to think about, nobody wants to have 40 apps on their phone and basically put in payment information into all of them. They may not find that to be secure. People don't want to remember all the password and username for each of those, different navigation systems for all of them. They basically want to have maybe, call it 5 to 10 apps on their phone that they live their digital life on, that they check in with those apps every single day, that the data associated when you use one part of that app feeds other parts of the app, so that your next best transaction on that app can be predicted and can be optimized for financial health or budgeting or whatever you may want to do on that super app. One of the key attributes of a super app is trust. And one of the things that PayPal has is brand trust. Depending on what survey you look at, we've been ranked as high as the #2 most trusted brand in the world. And I think trust in a brand comes from, one, respecting the privacy of your consumers, not selling their information without explicit approval from them to go and do so, making sure that there is security that is beyond reproach. All of the people on this call know how often companies are attacked from a cyber perspective. On every single transaction we do about 300 security checks in about 30 milliseconds before we let a transaction happen. Those are crucial because most consumers have had their username and password stolen and they're on the dark web. And so if all you're looking at is credentializing somebody coming into our platform, there's going to be a lot of fraud on the platform. And, we need to make sure that that when you come into the platform, that it really is you and that we're protecting you as well. And so a super app needs to have trust as its foundation, needs to have a common nav system, common set of data across all the different apps or subsections of the app, and increasingly will be any form of payment that you want. CBDCs, cryptocurrencies, credit cards, debit cards, cash balances, any way you want to pay. Do you want to pay now? Do you want to pay later? Do you want to do some combination? Do you want to throw in rewards points and have that converted into fiat? Do you want to split transactions between all those different kinds of payments? And then do you have forms of high yield savings, investing, budget tools as part of that app, bill payment, and then all forms of shopping tools, wish lists, price monitoring, deals and offers, all seamlessly done in one integrated app. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. We are code complete in version 1.0 of our app. We are just beginning to roll it out. But every single quarter, we will have additional functionality coming into that app. We have a roadmap over the next 18 months and a very aggressive investment into that super app. But I think that's the way of the world, Cliff. I think more and more, and it needs to be open. You have to have open APIs so that other apps can link into it as well. So it's an ambitious consumer vision, that we have, but we're underway on it as of this month.
It's so interesting when you're in Brazil and really in any country, people live on their iPhone and they're always texting. And I find the convergence of conversational commerce a great app. And I think it'll be enormously successful in markets like Brazil.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right.
And
we'll have messaging in the platform. If I send you a P2P, payment, and you just want to say thank you, and then I want to kind of say, well, what are you going to do with it? And all, like, you shouldn't have to leave the platform to go and do that. And naturally, through messaging, payments tend to occur as well between friends. And so I just think before you had messaging apps, you had payment apps, you had banking type of apps, you had investment apps, you had shopping tools. Those are really all beginning to merge together. And you need a combination, as I mentioned, of trust, great platform and tech know-how, and scale both on the merchant side and the consumer side. I think those are all key critical components.
You talk about scale. I remember our last conversation, and it had to be before COVID because it was in your office, and you were talking about the explosive growth of Venmo. And I would like you to give us an update on Venmo specifically.
Yeah, well, Venmo's still in the US only, but we have over 76 million people on Venmo. Think about that. It's predominantly a millennial oriented payment app, social payment app. So you can think about the type of market share we have on that. We have a run rate of like 250 billion or so of payment volume on that. The way that I think about Venmo is when we spun out from eBay, PayPal, about 6 years ago, we did total across all of PayPal about 280 billion of payment volume. Venmo itself has a run rate of that at this point. PayPal has a run rate of now $1.25 trillion over our platform. And last quarter, we grew that at 40%. So you can really get a sense of just how rapidly, not just Venmo is growing, but the whole digital payments environment is accelerating dramatically.
I was hoping by bringing it up, we could move up the timetable to introduce Venmo to Brazil.
We are thinking about how we take Venmo into international markets as well.
You must have a real challenge in deciding what your priorities are. Former very senior leader in government said to me, if it's not on the first page of my 10 most important things, it's not important. About a week later, I went back to see him in his new position. And he said, well, now there's a second page.
Yeah, the problem, of course, with that is, there's so many important things, but you've got to figure out what are the 3 to 5 that must get done and must get done extremely well. My message now into PayPal is quality trumps speed to market. I will trade off quality. I will trade off time to market for quality. I no longer believe in something that is sort of a Silicon Valley trope, which is this minimum viable product that you put out into the market. I actually believe right now, given our scale and given what our aspirations are, that everything we put out into the market needs to kind of be like a maximum value proposition. It needs to be something we are truly proud of. We can test something at 1%, to do A/B testing, and we do, something like 43,000 software releases a year. So we're constantly doing A/B testing. But anything we put out in the market at scale, we need to be proud of it. And I think you can only do so many things and do them extraordinarily well. And that's I don't know how many times I need to be taught that lesson, but I'm really putting some real discipline into our roadmaps to make sure we don't overextend ourselves.
It's interesting. Back in our old net to phone days, first mover advantage was critical. But I wanted to get back to your comment, which we don't need to dwell on, which is trust in brand. First mover does not necessarily give you trust in brand. And therefore, time to market is important, but having the right product at the right time is most important. Anyway, let me move to crypto and blockchain. Valor has been involved with crypto and blockchain since our early investment in Coinbase, which we are still supporting, Coinbase in Brazil. Today, Valor is one of the most active, I would say the most active investor in crypto in the region. And I know PayPal has been an early adapter and focused on crypto, laying the groundwork many years ago for what you're doing today. In 2014, PayPal made it possible for online vendors to accept payments via partnership with Coinbase specifically. In 2019, PayPal made a decision to leave Libra. If we had more time, I'd love to dwell on that decision. But today, you've made a lot of progress as one of the only payment companies to allow users to use crypto as a funding source. We believe there are higher value use cases for crypto in emerging markets, especially where you have high currency volatility. I know you've been in contact with regulators and many central banks as they are thinking through their CBDC strategies. In fact, we mentioned Roberto Campos, and I was glad to have actually listened to some of those conversations, which I found to be fascinating. We'd love to hear your thoughts on crypto more broadly, where PayPal will continue to demonstrate its leadership, and how you will be able to partner with central banks as they launch their own CBDCs.
We're all in on digital currencies. I've set up a separate business unit, given a tremendous amount of funding. We are targeting the very best players in the world to join us. We've got names and phone numbers, and we're going after talent in a very concerted way. I've had the fortunate circumstance of having Wences Casares on our board for 5 years. I think Wences is one of the most thoughtful and knowledgeable people, especially in the Bitcoin arena, but I would say cryptocurrency in general. And we've had more than a couple of conversations around it, and those conversations continue even to this day. I consider him a mentor when it comes to this part of the business for sure. To me, the least interesting part of cryptocurrency is what will the price of Bitcoin be tomorrow or a week, or what's the intrinsic value of a certain cryptocurrency. If crypto is just an asset that was being traded, it'd be interesting, but we wouldn't have put a whole business unit around it. It'd be a part of our investment portfolio for consumers to invest there versus gold or stocks, whatever it may be. What I do think is incredibly important about crypto and blockchain or DLT technology is what kind of utility can that add to payments, and what can the underlying infrastructure do to modernize the financial system. And clearly, as I mentioned before, today's system is it's antiquated. It can take days to get your own money when it's transferred to you. You do an international remittance, it could take sometimes up to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks to get that remittance. That's ridiculous, especially when cash flow issues are so important to such a large part of the world's population. It's also inefficient Go ahead, Cliff. You were going to say
I was just
something.
going to say, and it's expensive.
Exactly. And so, to send a remittance, a traditional remittance can cost 8% of the money that you send. So you send $100, the recipient gets $92. You do that digitally, and you can do that not at half the cost, at 25% of that cost, maybe less than that. And so across the world today, the take rate across the world in the world's financial system is about 2.8%. And it's stubbornly hung around 2.8% for the last 10 years or so, which is crazy given the volume that goes through the system, the progress of technology. You'd expect that take rate to come down. And the worst part about it is for the rich, that take rate is much lower than 2.8%. But for those who are underserved or have less money, it's well more, can approach 800 basis points and above to do a transaction that many of us on this call take for granted. And so modernizing the infrastructure, I believe, can create instantaneous access to funds, can do this at a much lower cost, can be much more inclusive, bring more and more people into the financial system. It can make the distribution of benefits, take out intermediaries, lower the cost of that dramatically, speed it. If you think about here in the US, we mailed stimulus checks to, 40, 80 million people or so in the US. That's crazy to think about. Most people weren't even living where the check was mailed to. It takes forever for the check to get there. Then they have to cash it at a cash checking location. And then they have to actually take that cash and, stand in line to pay bills. It's so inefficient the way we do things today. Go ahead.
The Central Bank of Brazil, with their PIX system, was able to do this flawlessly. And we're running out of time, and I want to get to one more point. So if I can ask our sponsors to allow me to make one last question, but I'm going to add 2 points to it. So hopefully we can cover it quickly, because I know the audience has a lot of questions for you. But it's remarkable what PayPal has been able to accomplish over the last decade in your bottom line. But I've heard you talk about your double bottom line. You talk about PayPal being based upon a culture of 4 pillars: innovation, collaboration, inclusion, and wellness. How ingrained, how important is that second double bottom line to the success of the company? And let me add to it, as you are looking at all of the recent, and I'm sure many more, venture investments, and you look at companies, do you look at the culture in those companies to see if they conform to your double bottom line before you make investments in the companies and the individuals that lead them?
Is that all the questions, Cliff?
I can't get any more.
Yeah, more right now. Look, a lot of people consider me to be an activist CEO because I do take positions on the issues of our day. I try to be very thoughtful. I try to be sure anytime we take a position, it's consistent with the values of PayPal. But I strongly believe that corporations have an obligation, a responsibility to step up and be part of the solution, not just leave that to governments and to the public sector. We need to work hand in hand together. There's so many things that we can do as companies that are entirely within our jurisdiction to do, like the financial health of our workers. We should all do a study on how healthy are the finances of every one of our workers. I did it. It was shocking what the results were. It was something like 40% of our population at PayPal had only 4 to 6% of their salary, of their income left over to pay for anything that went beyond their taxes and essential living expenses. and they need at least 20% NDI to be self-sufficient, to not have financial stress. And so we raise salaries, we give everybody equity in the company, we slash the cost of healthcare benefits by 60%. Those are all things we can do. We can pay equally across gender and ethnicity. We need to step up for that. If there's something happening in the world that fosters either hate or violence, we can't let those groups be part of our platforms. And we have to take the responsibility to step up for that. And I get criticized from both the left and the right for actions we take. And I get multiple death threats for actions that we take as well. But I feel like we have a responsibility to say, that our values aren't something that just hang up on a wall. They are things that we actually put into place every day. And I hope that everybody listening, that if you want to be ever moved from being a good company to a great company, and we have a long way to go before we're a great company, the single biggest asset you have is your employees. Like, are they passionate? Do they believe? Do they want to execute against the mission? Do they believe in your values? And if you stand up for those, you attract the very best talent. You have the low attrition. You have people who are inspired. You can lead people intellectually on a lot of cases, but when people are both led intellectually and with passion in their heart, nothing can stop that group of people. So I think it is not only the right thing to do, but I think if you want to be a great company, it's an essential thing to have this, what you call a double bottom line, but to me, it's just the next best form of capitalism moving forward.
Yeah, Dan, great executives lead by example, and I think you've said it all. So with that, let me turn it back to BSV, and I think they've got a few questions. I think primarily for you, but I'll turn it back to them.
Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you, Cliff, and thank you, Dan, for the powerful words and for such an insightful discussion. And we'll now move over to the Q&A portion of this event. And if you're in the audience, send over your questions. Dan would like to start this with a question from an executive yesterday at a fireside chat with Harley Finkelstein, the president of Shopify. And we would love to hear your take on this as well. Do you think that fintechs and e-commerce platforms are destined to merge? Payment information is very valuable to lower customer acquisition costs and reduce churn in e-commerce. So that was the question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there will be some horizontal integration inevitably. But I think there's no one company that can do it all. At least I don't believe that. I think this is such a huge addressable market, something like $100 trillion addressable market. And each of us have a set of assets that we specialize in, that we're particularly good at. And the way that I am approaching this is through kind of open APIs into our platform and taking the best of, for instance, what maybe banks may have, and for savings and some other things, and plugging that into our platform, making sure there's a common UX, common data. It's not like a affiliate model where somebody comes in and we send them off to a different website. It's fully integrated. But those are capabilities that I don't necessarily want to build, nor necessarily is that the regulatory environment that I want to be in. And so, for instance, there are a lot of people who are ingesting, PayPal's payment into their apps as well. That could go from Uber to Airbnb and others where, every time you do that, you're probably going over the PayPal platform, whether you know it or not, because they don't necessarily want to be fully in payments. with all the regulatory oversight, compliance, risk, fraud capabilities. And so I think where we're going to feel we need something that where it's mission critical, we'll either build or acquire. But I think one of the skill sets we all need to learn in this environment as more and more is coming together is how do we partner together? How do we take our platforms and merge the best of them into our platforms? How do we think about sharing in the economics of that? And that's not an easy thing to go do, but I think it's absolutely critical for the best companies to offer the best potential value proposition to their customers.
Thank you, Dan. And now we have a question from Pedro Moura, who's the CEO at Flourish, which is a portfolio company of PayPal Village Capital Program. How do you think about internal innovation, M&A, and collaboration through partnerships? How is it different in the US versus outside internationally?
Well, those are different things, and they are linked all the same. I think it's very, very important that companies have an organic innovation capability and are very good at it. When PayPal spun off from eBay 6 years ago, I've been at the company now for 7 years. We had a very monolithic platform, all C++ based. It took 6 months to make a change on our website. And so we were doing a lot more acquisition because we couldn't really do a lot of internal development until we revamped our tech stack, and it took a ton of investment and time to get there. Today, we're putting out more product and more innovation than we've ever done before. And we have less need for acquisitions than we did before. And we want to make sure when we do an acquisition that it can be seamlessly integrated into our platform through a set of APIs so that we don't have multiple platforms and multiple interfaces into a customer from PayPal. But you're always going to have some combination of internal development and a roadmap. And remember what I talked to Cliff about. I want to be very focused on that and execute extremely well against that. But there are going to be parts of the world where it would take me forever to get presence in that part of the world. And acquiring somebody might be the easiest and simplest way for us to move forward in that part of the world. Or there may be a capability that is on my roadmap, but as Cliff said, it's on the second page. And honestly, I'm not going to get to that second page. I'm just not. And so I need to acquire it, or it's going to take me forever to get that capability. And then collaboration, as I mentioned, is a critical skill set that most companies are not good at. You can't collaborate and think that by signing a legal agreement that you have a deal and you're collaborating, because the second you sign that legal document, 2 months later it's out of date. Things change all the time. And so it has to be a personal relationship. You need to basically say, anytime I've gone back to a legal document, things are bad in that relationship. It's got to be one that is flexible. We can trust each other. We know each other. And we have the same objectives in mind. And so we adapt moving forward. So those are three different things: collaboration, innovation, internal organic innovation, and acquisition. But they tie in together, and you need to think holistically. What am I trying to do? What do I want to own completely organically? What things do I want to buy because they're essential to my value proposition? And where can I collaborate where I'm never going to get to those things, but integrating it or ingesting capabilities or giving capabilities to somebody else helps an overall value proposition for a subsegment of customers.
And that's a great framework to think about innovation. And we have another question from our audience and to Dan, and we want to hear Cliff's perspective here as well. Do you both think that Brazil has the user behavior and the regulatory conditions for super apps, or are we still far away in comparison to China, for example?
Cliff, I've been talking forever. You want to take a stab at that, and then I'll take. What's that? I like listening to you better. I'll add a comment at the end about CVM and central bank and the Ministry of the Economy, as they are very focused on this subject matter. But it might be interesting for you to talk first about China, which has obviously been in the news with a lot of headlines over the last week or two as they navigate their interests, government interest as it relates to the tech sector and regulatory oversight. So I'd like, if you would, to give us your insight on that.
Yeah. I would say that, first of all, just to take one step back, I think every government and all the regulatory folks in those governments, and there's so many different regulatory agencies, all of them struggle to keep up with all of the changes happening in the tech arena. I can only imagine what they go through. Like, this is all I do, and I struggle to keep up with everything. Cliff, you mentioned that the pace of change is changing. I mean, I actually think that we're seeing this tremendous change in the pace of change right now. I mean, I've never seen it at the acceleration that it is today, whether that be new technologies coming out or the consolidation and of industries into one. It's consumer behavior changing dramatically. And so I think all regulatory bodies are struggling to keep up, but every government official I talk to and regulator I talk to all really have a couple of common things that they adhere to. One is they want their citizens to be included in the financial system, that they want their citizens to have at least a modicum of financial health, that they expect the private sector and the public sector to work hand in hand together, and that they want to be sure that consumers understand and aren't misled in any way by either deceptive business models or not full disclosure of terms and conditions. By the way, I think that's all of us should agree with that. Those make sense to go and do. How we do it, the speed we do it, the regulatory sandboxes that we work in to make sure that we don't accidentally introduce second and third order effects when we put something into the market. We all need to be very cognizant of the integrity and stability of the financial system, but that doesn't mean there shouldn't be responsible innovation that occurs. China had a very unique environment when WeChat Pay and Ali began. They didn't really have established point of sale systems. They didn't have established credit systems. They really started from scratch, created QR codes everywhere. They linked those directly into accounts and did not work within the context of the financial system. And I think, our approach, and I think now both Ali and WeChat as well, is to work within the context of the regulatory environment as well as within the context of the financial system. I do think everybody is thinking about super apps in some way, shape, form, or another. I think certain parts of the ecosystem, it's more difficult for them to do. It's a full redefinition of their business model. They need to be tech forward. They need to have scale. that goes beyond what their current scale is. And so I do think there's a lot of disruption coming, but it needs to be done in a responsible public-private partnership. And nobody on this call should think for a moment that working outside of regulatory bodies or not working hand in hand with them is an acceptable outcome. It isn't. And I think we just all need to embrace this partnership with both governments and central banks and regulators, because it's just too important in terms of what we're all trying to go do.
Yeah, well, let me add a point, and that is, you may not like what you see coming out of any one country, like China, where there has been some significant changes literally over the last few weeks, but at least there's a centralized decision-making being made. Brazil is fortunate in that the CVM really governs all financial capital markets. The United States is much more complicated. There are a lot of authorities. This is a new administration. People are jockeying in their own avenues for decision-making, and it's a collective effort in the United States. What I'm struck with is how cooperative CVM and central bank and the Ministry of the Economy is on trying to respond to this incredibly rapid pace of innovation happening. I hope that the United States is able to come together with centralized decision-making from all of the divergent agencies and continues to take leadership in making decisions earlier than later. But with that being said, it's difficult when you've got a streaming locomotive to try to contain it when things are moving so quickly in so many different spaces.
I do think, Cliff, though, right now, I would say 85% of the world's central banks are thinking about next generation infrastructure, CBDCs. The US is clearly has a number of different efforts underway. Brazil is lucky in that the Minister of Finance and Roberto Campos, both are pushing a digital agenda and are quite advanced in their thinking. And so I think Brazil's got, maybe less things to juggle, but they're also very, very together in pushing that digital agenda.
Roberto's on record saying that he wants to see a CBDC in the not too distant future.
Yeah,
so with that, if the BSV wants me to, I can say thank you to Dan once again. I think everyone sees why you're such an inspirational leader. And I'd like to thank all those that have been listening tonight to what I hope you've enjoyed as much as I've enjoyed it.
That's great. Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And as we wrap up our digital conference, I wanted to reflect quickly on our mission and our journey. This was not an ordinary year. Like any other organization, we faced our fair share of challenges. We pivoted from our traditional in-person format to a digital conference. We look for opportunities to reach a bigger and broader audience, to offer new products. But one thing didn't change: our commitment to bringing thought leadership in technology and innovation, the two pillars that define our movement and our path towards a stronger and more competitive country. And again, sure, we'll continue to do that for years to come. And I wanted to thank our team, our sponsors, our speakers throughout the year, and most importantly, our audience. We'll continue to publish our podcasts, and we hope to connect in our in-person conference in 2022. Thank you all.
We thank you. Good night. Dan, good seeing you. Hope to see you soon.
Good to see you too, Cliff. Yeah, bye-bye.